morning, everyone. Let's take a moment of silence to tonight God present among us. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end.
Our Lady of Wisdom,
Pray for us.
in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Here we are. Well, after a long time waiting, thank you, Dr. Jacob, for talk about this topic. And then today we come and we will talk about liberalism. Siali qua potestas sumen bonum, opote ilam esse perfectissima. Potesta autem humana est imperfectissima. Saint Thomas Aquinas. I hope you all will know the meaning of this quote by now, after 2 years learning Latin. So I want to go back to the background. That's why I build up this capstone upon the previous capstone I have made with the earlier modern philosophy about Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, about social contract. But liberalism includes the classical and modern liberalism. I will focus on modern liberalism, which is that people think that freedom is to do what you want to do, and you have a right to achieve it. So hopefully you will remember Louis, philosopher, talk about Michael Walzer in the Just War, and in the struggle of decent politics, define liberal. A liberal is someone who's tolerant of ambiguity, who can join arguments, that he doesn't have to win, who can live with people who disagree, who have different religion or different ideologies. That's a liberal. But those liberal qualities don't imply any social or economic doctrine. I want to discuss the current issue in liberalism here. As Victor mentioned earlier about Marion and Glendon, is a right talk. She has the passion for absolute formulation. I have the right to do whatever I want with my property for my pleasure. Is it right for people to say that I have a right to do whatever I want for my pleasure? And the society have to agree with me about that. That's my true freedom to do that. But Pope John Paul II said that freedom is to do what human beings ought to do. So whether the Pope said is right, as a Catholic, I would say that yes, maybe the Pope said right because he's a Pope. But what's the implication of the issue? Whether Mary Ann Glendon or Pope John Paul II right, can they both fall into the relativism? My statement, freedom is to do what human beings ought to do, not what they want to do, to grow in wisdom and love, and to achieve true happiness in God. So in this research, I have found out that yes, it's important for us to recognize what the true freedom is and how we can achieve that freedom in order to have the true happiness. And where is our happiness can be? The true happiness in God. It relies in God. And hopefully after this research, we can know how to find out to achieve the true freedom and true happiness for us, for ourselves. In a philosophical argument, the definition of freedom according to encyclopedia philosophy, freedom for, this on behalf of which freedom is being claimed, and freedom from the absence of coercion and restraint imposed by others. We can recall Rousseau in this statement. Political participation the meaning of liberty in society in two different ways: an interest and mode of activity, the right and opportunity to engage, the forms part of wider structure of liberty. But for Locke, in the justice of the government, a person have a right to follow their own will in all things that the law has not prohibited, not to be subject to the inconstant, uncertain, unknown, and arbitrary wills of others. So therefore, liberalism is based on the individual. The state exists to protect the right of individuals to do whatever they want, so they attain individual good and not share. For a modern philosophy, anybody here play wiffle ball? Who is a good wiffle ball player?
Johnny Kuzma.
Who is a bad wiffle ball player? So, for a fair game, who can play the good? Who can make the rule for wiffle ball? The good player, the bad player, or me, the one never played wiffle ball? So, now welcome you to the Justice as Fairness of John Rawls. When we play that game, we have to make the fair for everybody can attain the game. And John Rawls have a theory of justice and fairness and the idea of public reason. There are two principles of justice and fairness: that each person needs to have an equal right to the most extensive scheme of equal basic liberties compatible with a similar scheme of liberties for others. And the social and economic inequities are to be granted so that they are both reasonably expected to be to everyone's advantage. Attack to position and offices open to all. So they are to be attacked to office and position open to all under condition of fair equality of opportunity. So everybody in the game has the opportunity for a fairness to play that game. Not a good person, a bad person, or even the one don't know. That's justice as fairness for Rousseau, for Rawls. And Rawls have the idea of veil of ignorance. When you get into the veil of ignorance, you don't have any identity, who you are, no culture, no race, no languages, nothing, just who you are. That sounds great because everybody equal and they just individual people, and they get into the original state, original position. From that they can define themselves because no identity, no race, and no culture. They can identify themselves. And in the idea of public reason, the idea of public reason specifies at the deepest level of the basic moral and political values that are to determine a constitutional democratic government relation to its citizens and their relation to one another. It's a 5 different aspects. The fundamental political questions to which it applies, the person to whom it applies, and it can contain as given by a family or reasonable political conception of justice. The application of these conceptions in discussion of coercive norm to be enacted in the form of legitimate law for democratic people, and the citizen checking that the principle derived from their conception of justice satisfy the criterion of reciprocity. But for Paul Whiteman, a professor, and he very defends for Rawls in Rawls' political liberalism and reasonable faith. Human life have a single dominant end for the sake of which all else is to be sought. The right of what maximize the good, then the content of our obligation to one another will ultimately depend upon our purely preferential choices. It's not on for the individual to decide what they want to do. and respond to liberalism from philosophy and the Catholic Church. For Patrick Deneen, a philosopher, in his book that Why Liberalism Failed, the fundamental premise of liberalism is that the natural condition of man is defined above all by the absence of culture, and that, by contrast, the presence of culture marks the existence of artifice and convention, the simultaneous effort to alter but conform to nature. Secondly, liberal anthropology assumed that natural man was a cultureless creature existing a state of nature, noteworthy of the absence of any artifice created by humans. So liberalism failed because people based on the false conception of human freedom, the misunderstanding of the human nature, and misunderstanding of the relationship between human beings and nature. They failed in itself and then contradicting itself in the liberalism. For Heinrich, a Roman, argues of being and human being and natural law. The being is universally given simultaneously with every act of knowledge. Knowledge is true knowledge through its agreement with the being. Being, however, is reality differentiated according to act and potency, according as being is determined or is capable of determination. Being is reality before the intellect and truth in the intellect. Is it goodness before the practical reason and in the will. In the book of natural law, we have been discussed during this semester. So we can see that the being is the first act, and the speculative reason, that's what the being, what the is, and from that speculation, that the practical reason with what the good is, and we know, and by what we know, we will and act on that reason. So what being the is and is the ought to be, it has to be done. So what the is, it ought to do this thing. But for Kant, in critique of pure reason, that is derived the is from the ought, and David Hume in fact valued the economy. He derived the is from the ought, so the is cannot do anything with the ought, and is the fact, and ought is the value of the thing, but it cannot do anything, and it just separates out the meaning of that. And so therefore, the being and morality in modern philosophy, for David Hume, that the fact valued economy deriving ought from is, but for Kant, being is not the predicate. For being is just nothing. Being in the realm of noumena. Whatever we see is just in the phenomena, in the realm of phenomena, in space and time. 100 theaters is 100 theaters. It's at nothing in that. There's nothing new in that. But for Rawls, in the original position, we are the subject of the law, so we define what we want. Therefore, we can define morality for our own will. For some Catholic thinkers, philosophy jingo, morality has foundation in religion by the teaching of the Catholic Church, Decalogue. The law said, you shall not kill, so you cannot do abortion. So you shall not steal, you cannot steal the property from the other. Whatever the church says is right. You cannot do anything with that. So therefore, the modern philosophy, morality is not based on the reasoning of human beings. Moral acts are just for those who have faith in God, or the people can define it by themselves. But on the other hand, for Aquinas on human action, human acts are what humans do with reason and will. I want to emphasize this one, the difference between the human acts and the acts of human. Y'all know the difference, right? The human acts, we act with reason. An act of human is what we just do with no reason. An action. The man differs from irrational creatures in this, that he is master of his acts, and only those acts will properly be called human, of which man is the master. It is thanks to reason and will that man is master of his acts, which is why free will is called a faculty of will and reason. Therefore, only those acts which proceed from deliberate will are properly called human action. After we have a practical reason, we know what we want to do for the good, so we act upon that to achieve that good. But every human act have reason in that, and they will act on that. But moral life, human action define the domain of morality. Moral acts and human acts are the same. Moral life is what human act toward the end to achieve their telos. It was said above that acts are called human insofar as they proceed from deliberate will. But the object of will is the good and end. It is obvious then that the starting point of human acts, insofar as they are human, is the end. So too it is their term, seeing that in which a human act terminates in what the will intended as the end. So our will have the end, and the end in the true happiness in God. So every action of our act has to toward the end. But our freedom is control our will toward to the end. Any action can make us feel like that's very good. The good act to show that we will act upon that good. But we should not do that good, choose the lesser good, and that will be evil acts. So Simon Peter can tell us more about that, a difference between sin and moral act and action in the evil. Right, Simon Peter? So therefore, for Aquinas, the human act rooted in reason are the same with the moral act. In the political philosophy, in the view of the Catholic Church, Father James Charles, he born in 1928 and 2019, the religion of political philosophy, the metaphysics, and theology. The medievals considered theology to be a queen of all the theoretical and practical disciplines because of revelation's origin in the divine intellect. Politics was considered to be a practical science. Indeed, the highest of practical science, political philosophy looked at political things not primarily about its own well-being, but about its relation to other science. You remember the quote I read earlier from St. Thomas Aquinas? Its meaning is if some power is the highest good, it follows that it should be the most perfect power. Human power, however, is the most imperfect, for it is rooted in the wills and opinions of man, in which there is the maximum inconsistency. So our wills always change. It's not a constant will, but it changes. I can will this and I can will that and change different from time and space. We change our will. But on the experience of our own existence, the experience of our own existence causes us to wonder both about why we are and why anything at all is. Our curiosity can lead us to pride in which we close ourselves. We cannot remain closed within ourselves without justifying ourselves. Justifying ourselves to the world, to the whole, and to reason. Reason can examine what relation says of itself, what it says about God, about eternal life, about resurrection, about virtue, about politics, and about evils. So we can see that the reason very important for us to control our will, to act upon our will with reason, to choose our true freedom. And political and revelation, political philosophy and Catholic Church, they are, if possible, to be related in coherent, non-contradictory, whole based in reason, such that each retains its essential nature as it relates to the other. So political philosophy and the Catholic Church, they both relate to each other and they're coherent. In Roman Catholic Church, during their time on earth, live in the polities to which they belonged or dwell in. Like everyone else, they too are political animals, and they live within the society, as Aristotle said. So now we move to the theological argument. The definition of freedom. In the Catechism, freedom is the power rooted in reason and will to act or not to act, to do this or that, and so to perform deliberate action on one's own responsibility. By free will, one shapes one's own life. Human freedom is the force for growth and maturity in truth and goodness. It attains its perfection when directed toward God, our beatitude. We feel familiar with this statement in the Catechism. By our free will, we will form our own life. It's just our own doing. Yes, and we can direct it ourselves to God, and we will become the master of ourselves to direct to God with our own free will to find the true happiness. In the scriptures, St. Paul talked about politics, who is God's servant. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid. For rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servant, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. In Romans 13:4. St. Paul to Timothy, that we may lead a quiet, peaceable life, godly and respectful in every way. In the 1 Timothy. So, and in Catechism, number 2235, those who exercise authority should do so as a service. Political authorities are obliged to respect the fundamental rights of the human person. The citizens is obliged in conscience not to follow the directives of civil authorities when they are contrary to the demands of the moral order, to the fundamental rights of person, or to the teaching of the gospel. So as Christian and Catholic, we don't have to follow the direction of the authority, civil authority, if it's contrary to the demand of our moral order, to the fundamental right of the person, and the teaching of the gospel. If the contrary, we don't have to follow them, and we can do that with our freedom. St. Thomas Aquinas about two virtues and action. Each individual person relates to the entire community as a part of the whole. We all live in society and community. We are related to each other. We're not an individual, but we are the person related to as a whole. He that seeks the good of the many seeks in consequence his own good for two reasons. First, because the individual good is impossible without the common good of the family, state, or kingdom. Secondly, because since man is a part of the home and state, he must need to consider what is good for him by being prudent about the good of the many. And whatever is directed to an end takes its goodness from being ordered to that end, so that the nearer it is to the end, the better it is. Religion approaches nearer to God than the other moral virtues, insofar as its actions are directly and immediately ordered to the honor of God. So we can see the difference between the individual and the person. The individual in the society, we said legal justice in society, and society distributes justice to the individual, and we have a communicative justice between the individual and the individual. But for modern society, they don't have the legal justice. Everybody has the right, and the individual have a right by themselves, and they separate themselves from the society, and they can find their own good by their own free will, and they separate from the society. But in here we find the good in the community. The community have their own good as the family, the state, and the kingdom. And Pope John Paul II, in his Centesimus Annus, he critique about the state and its citizen, about socialism and liberalism. This the treatment of the duty of the state, and the state have to provide justice for the society. The state cannot limit itself to favoring one portion of the citizens, namely the rich and prosperous, nor can it neglect the other, which clearly represent the majority of society. Otherwise, there would be a violation of that law of justice which ordains that every person should receive his due. So the state have to make the distribution and help to the individual receive that what is due to them by the due justice. Nor did the church close her eye to the danger of fanaticism or fundamentalism among those who, in the name of an ideology with purpose to be scientific or religious, claim the right to impose on others their own concept of what is true and good. But freedom obtained is through full development only by accepting the truth. In a world without truth, freedom loses its foundation, and man exposed to the violence of passion and to manipulation, both open and hidden. So for Pope John Paul XXIII, about the man conscience and representative of the state on parliamentary, Father on earth. He stated that the representative of the state have no power to bind men in consent, unless their own authority is tied to God's authority, is the participation in it. So, and then for a reason, authority is before and else is a moral force. It has to help the individual to achieve the good with a moral act. It cannot force them, and for the reason the pure rulers should be to the individual conscience, to the duty which every man has for voluntarily contributing for the common good. The common good of individual state is something that cannot be determined without reference to the human person, and the same is true for the common good of all states taken together. So all the states have to share the common good for each other in the individual state. So that cannot determine with the reference of a human person and human reason. So this can be done by direct action, if need be, or by the creation throughout the world of a sort of condition in which rulers, individual states can more easily carry out their specific function. For Pope Leo XIII about the church and the state in immortal day, he said the public enactment are in great measure framed with this design between the church and the state, the drawing up of law, the administration of state affairs, and the godless education of youth, the spoliation and suppression of religion, just order, overthrow the temporal power of Roman pontiff, all alike aim to this one end, to paralyze the action of Christian institutions, to cram to utmost the freedom of Catholic Church, and to curtail her every single prerogative. For all this, those so reasonable and full of counsel find little favor nowadays when state not only refuse to conform the rules of the Christian wisdom, but seem even anxious to recede it from there further and further on each successive day. So when we see that the state and the church, you can see that the Jews shall make you free in the Gospel of St. John 8:32. When the true and between the state and the church, we have to recognize the true freedom. So the foundation of the state cannot injure the true freedom of the person, the people in that society or the state. But for the best of the state, they need the best parents and guardian of liberty among men. That's to be true. Pope Leo XIII about the true meaning of liberty on Anthony Patrick's Eternal Father. For the teaching of Thomas on the true meaning of liberty, which at this time is running into license, on the divine origin of all authority, on laws and their force, on the paternal and just rule of princes, and on obedience to the higher power, on mutual charity one toward another, on all of these and kindness subject, have very great and invincible force to overturn those principles of the new order which are well known to be dangerous to the peaceful order of things and to public safety. So the teaching of Saint Thomas have a true meaning of the liberty. So Pope Leo the 13th continue about liberty or the nature of human liberty in the encyclical Libertas. Pope Leo the 13th distinguished the difference between natural and moral liberty. The natural liberty is that what other animate creatures follow their sense, seeking good and avoiding evil only by instinct. Man has reason to guide him in each and every act of his life. So we all have a natural liberty with instinct to do what we want by instinct. But I'm hungry, I can go to eat. I'm thirsty, I can go to drink. I'm drinking now. And when you're tired, you go to sleep. That's natural liberty to instinct. But for the moral liberty, the freedom of choice is the property of the will, or rather, is identical with the will insofar as it has in its action the faculty of choice. But the will cannot proceed to act until it is enlightened by the knowledge possessed by the intellect. Again, we go back to the being, speculative reason, practical reason, and the will will act with the intellect. But until the intellect will push the will into act upon that by the deliberate the choice, we do have the freedom of choice between good and bad. That lesser good or better good, we do have freedom to choose that. Like the morning you want to continue sleep, but 5:30 in the morning, wake up and go to the chapel and pray. That's the goal to closer to God in happiness. And sometimes we're tired, want to sleep more, take 15 minutes more and make a person, take 15 minutes more and late for mass. That's lesser good, but we do have freedom to try to get out of bed and go straight to the chapel to pray. That's our freedom to do that. And the law, the ordination of the reason is called law, which is a fixed rule of teaching what is to be done and what is to be left undone. Because we don't have a free will, but we need the fixed law to control and to rule our reason to get into the good. And the natural law, which is written and engraved in the mind of every man, and this is nothing but our reason, commanding us to do right and forbidding sin. The natural law is natural instinct in us, and we can use that reason to act upon that natural law. Liberty in relation to the state for a perfect authority exists for the welfare of those whom it governs. And although its proximate end is to lead man to the prosperity found in this life, yet in so doing, it ought not to diminish, but rather to increase man's capability of attaining to the supreme good, in which his everlasting happiness consists, which never can be attained if religion be disregarded. So the liberty in relation to the state that the state and the church have to cooperate together to find the liberty for the people and the man live in the society. Religion rule the people with paternal charity. The paternal charity religion is in essence is wonderfully helpful to the state, for since it derives the prime origin of all power directly from God Himself, with great authority charge rulers to be mindful of their duty to govern without injustice or severity, to rule their people kindly and with almost paternal charity. It admonishes subjects to be obedient to lawful authority as to the minister of God, and it binds them to their rulers, not merely by obedience, but by reverence and affection, forbidding all seditious and venturesome enterprise calculated to disturb public order and tranquility, and cause greater restriction to be put upon the liberty of the people. We can see now that the people have a misunderstanding of the authority and the power. When the people see the state do with authority, but they have to do the good for the people. But again, it contrary to the common good and contrary to the moral life of human being. You don't have to follow it. You just do our free will and reason to follow the teaching of the church to achieve the common good. For the liberalism is supported by naturalists and rationalists who are attempting in the domain of morality and politics. The rationalism, the supremacy of the human reason, refusing due submission to the divine eternal reason, proclaim its own independent and constitute itself the supreme principle and source and judge of truth. We can see that rationalism, they deny the authority of the teaching, divine teaching. They want to separate themselves and do their own thing by their individual right. They can do that independently with the teaching of the authority. And the free will of the individual. When one's man is firmly persuaded that he is subject to no one, it follows that the efficient cause of the unity of civil society not to be sought in any principle external to man or superior to him, but simply in the free will of individuals. The free will of individual, they separate themselves from the community, and they have their own right and they do whatever they want. But from the authority of the state comes from the people only. And just that every man individual reason is his only rule of life. That's what I want to do, this is my rule of life to do. But if I want to do for the good, it's my rule of life. I can achieve the good by my own will and reason. So the collective reason of the community should be the supreme guide in the management of all public affairs, and the doctrine of the supremacy of a greater number, and that all right and all duty reside in the majority. So God is the creator, supreme lawgiver, to refuse any bond of union between man and civil society on the one hand, God the creator and consequent the supreme lawgiver on the other, is plainly repugnant to the nature not only of man but of all created things. For necessity, all effects must in some proper way be connected with their cause, and it belongs to the perfection of every nature to content itself within the sphere and grade with the order of nature has assigned to it, namely that the lower should be subject and obedient to the higher. It's not talk about the hierarchy and the authority in the law, but talk about obedience in the authority to be united with one another in the same rule and the same law in God, that the lawgiver to give it to us from God, to give it to the church. And God is the ruler of the world. It follows therefore that the law of nature is the same thing as the eternal law implanted in rational creature, which means a human being, rational, and inclining them to their right action and end, can be nothing else but the eternal reason of God, creator, ruler of all the world. So therefore, the natural law is to help us determine what is good for us, and so that we can achieve our true happiness and the common good. The relationship between philosophy and theology. Pope John Paul II about a relationship between faith and reason. So both are based upon God's testimony and enjoy the supernatural assistance of grace, faith, is of an order other than philosophical knowledge, which depends upon sense, perception, and experience, which advances by the light of the intellect alone. Philosophy, the function of science within the order of natural reason, while faith, enlightened and guided by the Spirit, recognize the message of salvation, the fullness of grace and truth. We can see that the state is to help us to achieve and grow in virtue, but the church it helps us to receive the grace. By grace, enable us to grow in our faith and our reason to help us stay closer to God. And by the act of trusting oneself to God, in this act, intellect and the will display their spiritual nature, enabling the subject to act in a way that realizes personal freedom to the full. It's not just that freedom is part of the act of faith, it's absolutely required. Indeed, faith allows individuals to give consummate expression to their own freedom. But differently, freedom is not realized in decisions made against God. How could it be an exercise of true freedom to refuse to be open of the very reality which enables our self-realization? Men and women can accomplish no more important act in their lives than the act of faith. Is it here that freedom reaches the certain of truth and choose to live in that truth? So we have our own freedom and freedom to live with, to choose what the truth is and follow that truth and achieve that by the grace of the church. So the insight into ethics and politics by Mary McKay, as saying philosophy inquiry into the foundation of society and politics. For Aquinas, the relation between the political community is real and is for common good of the community. However, we can see the advantage and the problem in this society, which is communication, injustice, peace, and virtue. So we see the difference when they have the different communication in justice in society and justice in community, and the peace, the virtue, we will have to unity among. The proper purpose of society and politics for Aquinas, the law is to express justice and right. So Aquinas argued that the law of society, positive law, had to be done rightly for the common good of the individual and society. In the Catholic and political life, the church is to help people achieve grace which comes from God. So the state is to help organize the community to follow the desire of human beings and grow in virtue. The connection between the state and the church is the Holy Spirit. We pray for the leader of both the church and society so that they can lead us to our ultimate end, which is God. In the USCCB, the Catholic in political life has said that the separation of the church and the state does not require division between belief and public action, between moral principle and political choice, but protect the right of believer and religious group to practice their faith and act on the value in public life. So we can have more clear about this religious freedom. We talk about that, at band that talk about that in religious freedom. That we do have our faith and our freedom to choose what we do according to reason and faith. Pope Francis, on the principle of subsidiarity, which is the closest government should make the rule for that particular community, and solidarity in the obvious way take care for each other in that society in Evangelii Gaudium. Number 240. It is the responsibility of the state to safeguard and promote the common good of society based on the principle of subsidiarity and solidarity and fully committed to political dialogue and consensus building. It plays a fundamental role on which cannot be delegated in working for the integral development of all. This role at present calls for profound social humility. In her dialogue with the state and the society, the church does not have solutions for every particular issue. Together with the various sectors of society, she supports those programs which best respond to the dignity of each person and the common good. In doing that, she proposes in a clear way the fundamental values of human life and conviction which can then find expression in political activity. It's again, Pope Francis wants to emphasize into the dignity of each person and the common good, which the church and the state have to enforce and support that dignity. So every human being have dignity that can be achieved the freedom to do the good and to choose God and happiness. There's some implication whether liberalism is a sin or evil. Anybody can answer? Is a sin or evil? Sin? Evil? Moral evil? It seems like that liberalism is sinful and a morally evil action because of acts of the agent. I answer that liberalism is not a sin or moral evil. It is just an idea that can become an occasion potentially to sin or moral evil act. The action of agent followed by their free will can become sin or moral evil, depending on their deliberation of choice. They do have the freedom to choose what the good or bad for them, their own, and at that point it can become a sin or moral evil. But liberalism is just an idea, that occasion that can lead into the sin or moral evil act. In conclusion, the Catholic Church is within the society such that she needs to understand what true political freedom is to direct the faithful to live as they ought to. As a spiritual leader, the Church can help people understand their role in the state, correspond to their faith, and believe according to their human dignity. In this research, I have demonstrated that human freedom is to do what human beings ought to do, not what they want to do, which applies to all human beings everywhere. People have to exercise their free will to deliberate their choice between good and lesser good, which is a moral act and a privation of being. With true freedom, I am certain that people can be free to act toward their terrors, which is God according to their reason, not by their desire, nor by politics. With this freedom, people can continue to discover the objective truth in the world, to know, love, and live with God such that they can achieve happiness in their life. Thank you. The floor open for questions. Yes, Patrick.
Hey, Paul. I think you did a great job. Thank you. I think you explained some obvious problems that liberalism has. Could you explain a little bit more on page 2, Jonathan Rawls' idea of the veil of ignorance, and kind of like what that is, and maybe a problem with it?
In the veil of ignorance that lead the people into the original state of position, that you don't have to worry about what your race is, where you're from, what your relation with the other, no culture, just by your own individual. When you get into that position, that everybody equal, no race, no culture, and then you can be your own, and you decide what you want to do. You have right to do that. And then morality, that we are ourselves, and I can decide what I want to do. That's the problem with the roles when you talk about liberalism. And individual that one decide what I want to do is my moral life. No one have right to stop me. And when I'm free to do that, then society have to provide the place for me to accept my right of freedom to do that. For example, I want to play piano. That's my right. No one can stop me. But at midnight, I go to play piano in the seminary when everybody's sleeping. This is a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I cannot do that as an individual right. I cannot do that. But my rights, as long as I not affect the other, I can do everyone I want, everything I want to do, as long as not affect the other. What the Pope say? The swing of my right until at the end of the nose.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're right to swing the fist and.
To swing the right finger. That my freedom is until I hit in your nose. If not hit your nose, I can do whatever I want. Yeah, that's the right of the veil of ignorance. Yeah.
Thank you, Paul.
Yes, Louis.
You spent several times you alluded to the difference between sin and moral evil, and somehow in relation to liberalism. The Catholic Encyclopedia from 1911 defines sin as moral evil. Could you please flesh out that distinction and explain how it relates to liberalism?
Good question. The sin. Some people see the liberalism as sin. Some see it as moral evil. But with the sin, you define that the sin and the sin is a moral evil. Like what you just said.
No, I didn't define it. The Catholic Encyclopedia defined it. You seem to have an understanding of this distinction. I'm just asking you to flesh out the distinction for us. You flesh out the distinction for us and explain how it relates to liberalism.
The moral liberalism is an idea, an occasion. It's not a sin. It's not a moral evil. But when you act upon them, it starts. Go back to my demonstration here. That you deny your right and you deny the individual in the society. That's you bias your own. And the liberalism deny themselves. They deny the relationship between the individual and community and society, and then they act by their own. They choose the lesser good. That's a moral evil act. Like transgenderism, they are men and women, or two gender. Right now they have 1,000 second gender everywhere. But people have a right to do that, and society have to provide the law and rule to protect them what they want to do. That's the liberalism. But when they become sin, when they start to act upon what they want to do, and the will, deliberate the will, they act upon that reason, that occasion that follow the liberalism, it becomes a sin. And the sin in the theological definition of the church. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Were you asking a different question?
No, I'm interested in the answer. I just wanted to hear him.
Okay.
Yeah. There's some
You were
implication
asking a
in that.
different question, right?
Yes, but it's perfect.
This is the answer your question yet?
No, but it's okay.
Okay, thank you. Any question? Yes, Jonathan.
How can knowing the natural law and the common good help people, I think you mentioned this in the conclusion, so that they can choose, so that they can distinguish between what's good and like the lesser good, so that it leads them to perfecting their being?
The good and the lesser good?
Yeah, how can, I think you mentioned about the natural law and the common good, how can knowing that help them choose between what's good and what's less good?
We have to go back to the natural law. But when you choose, let's say that you want to do the fitness for the prisoners, right? And you want to do the goal in 1 month, I have to lose 5 pounds. And I choose that goal. But every day I have to go to the gym, exercise. And maybe 1 or 2 weeks I can lose 5 pounds. How about you sit in there in your room and play video game all day? Can you lose 5 pounds? That's you have to choose what's good for your goal and what's less good. This is natural law input into everybody that they can do have a rational reason, to reason dialectically to get into that goal. You want to achieve that goal, you have to do this. You want to lose 5 pounds, you have to go to the gym. There's no way you can just sit there and play video game, you can lose 5 pounds. I cannot help you with that. But the natural law can help the people with a reason to act upon them to get to the goal. And with the free will and free choice, you do have reason to know what's the good and bad. And the teaching of the church with the natural law and about the catechism do help the people to achieve their goal, which is happiness. Yet if you do this, go to mass, go to church, and learn the catechism, and with your free will, you learn the catechism, and then you know God, that God still exists, that God still love, and you know God. You accept that with your own free will, and you chose to be baptized, to join to the church. You can lead to the happiness, and that's what the church teaching. But you're not the truth. Okay, but I cannot believe in God, and I don't know, atheist, and then no. Lord God does not exist, and then how can the people help them to achieve happiness? And then they do have the free will, free choice that moment to choose, to act upon that. Is that your question? Thank you. Any question?
So,
Yes, no.
you, in this quote from, I think, St. Francis, or not, Pope Francis, you say that, where was that?
The last quote.
Yeah, yeah, so, but well, I can't find the exact passage, but should the church, so the church has a social teaching, right? Catholic social teaching is very strong, traditional doctrine going at least back to Leo XIII. Should the church offer specific prescriptions about what society should do? Right? So when we talk about Catholic social teaching, should it indicate, specificities about tax structures or that sort of thing?
Yeah. Well, I state the Pope Francis state very clearly. The church does not have a solution for every particular issue.
Why not?
Because the people have the free will and free choice. We cannot, if we force them, they lost the freedom.
But that's not the question. Is the church, that he's saying that the church, it's not a question of whether the church can force people. He's saying the church doesn't have the solutions. Actually, that's exactly the
Yeah, they cannot have a solution to it for the tax or the problem of society. We cannot. The church can go with them and explain to them, but we cannot make a particular solution for that issue.
Why not?
Because every society really big, and then the church in the society and they have relationship with them. And if we keep doing the particular solution with them, we do it all day. Every day just sit there and prescribe that you cannot do this, cannot do that.
So, in the natural law, there are 3 levels of precepts, right?
Yeah.
A particular solution would fall under which level of precept?
This is the 3rd level.
Yeah,
That's
3rd
a
level.
broad state of the society, God.
Right.
Broad level.
And what does Thomas say about, so the 1st level is absolutely universal, no can be ignorant, there's no exception. 2nd level, no, not really an exception, but some people can be ignorant. 3rd level, what does he say about there being exceptions and so forth?
They can some be in exception when they reserve their life for God.
No, I mean, like the more detailed the application of the natural law, the more exceptions you're going to have, right?
Yeah.
And so how do we know what the good application of the natural law is in any given country?
How can we know?
Yeah. Can different countries apply the natural law in different ways?
Yes, they can, because they have different culture and then different thoughts.
Who's best to judge that?
Who can judge that?
Yeah. It's a question of, so I'm just trying to get to a question of subsidiarity, right?
Yeah.
So the church has to be very reluctant about making very specific propositions in her social teaching. Because the context of society differ in such a way as to make specific propositions. So, should the church say that, women should only wear skirts and never pants? Too bad Joel's not here, he would probably. Right? And the fact of the matter is that in certain societies, in Scotland, the men wear skirts. So, whatever that says about the Scottish. So, but the church, we have a social teaching.
Yeah.
And the social teaching has basic principles which are absolutely universal. But the application of those principles has to be a certain flexibility, because the church is a universal institution. And you can't have, with the exception of those first principles, which are really universal, the applications have to allow for flexibility for application in specific circumstances, right? So can different societies advocate different degrees of freedom in some way?
Yeah.
That was an important thing, that the church has universal teaching that nobody can disagree with. But the church also is reticent about making specific proclamations, because there you have to have flexibility. Does that make sense?
That
Okay.
makes sense. Well, last question.
Anybody else? You're free to ask a question.
You have free choice to do the
I ask this
question?
question in a little bit of jest, not a serious question. Can liberalism and communism coexist?
Can liberalism and
And communism.
communism?
Coexist.
Let's just say that a communist lifestyle can be exist when everybody have a free will, free choice. In one will, like the Benedictine monk, they live in a monastery. But liberalism, it cannot coexist with communism, because they will conflict with each other. Liberalism live by themselves on individual right. They cannot coexist with each other. Yes.
Thank you.
The last question. Dr. Jacob, can I pursue the PhD for political philosophy now?
That's up to Archbishop Maynard, isn't it?
I'm asking that question again. Thank you, Dr. Jacob. Thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you. This was a very enlightening semester. I hope everybody benefited from this, and that